I don't think there's any doubt that the major political issue of our time will be the one with which we are now engaged, which is the issue of Brexit. It presents a fundamental challenge to Scotland as a nation in two ways. The first of which, it presents a democratic challenge because we did not vote to leave the EU. And although the argument now is that it was a question for the UK and was posited as that, I could show you a great deal of campaign material which was focused entirely on the issue of Scotland staying or going. And of course the issue of whether Scotland would be a member of the EU was germane, to say the least, to the independence referendum. And indeed some would argue that it was one of the key issues on which that referendum turned. So democratically there's an enormous challenge, both in terms of what Scotland decided to do and now faces the opposite result, and also because it was a determinant in what was a hard-fought, narrow independence referendum. But the second issue is economic, social, and in terms of who we are and how we see ourselves. Because membership of the EU, I would argue, has been fundamental in ensuring some major developments and changes in the way we live our lives over the last 40 years. I'm, as you know, a former environment minister. And when I look at environmental legislation, with all its difficulties, with lots of complaints about it, European environmental legislation has driven us forward in terms of environmental performance. European human rights legislation has driven us forward in terms of human rights. There is no doubt that the single market, which is a fairly complex concept, but in reality is about fair competition, the single market has led greatly to prosperity. And if you cast your mind back, those of us who are old enough to remember the campaign about entering the EU in 1974, one of the key arguments was economic. This would improve the economy. And indeed the evidence, insofar as one can understand, it's quite complex, but in terms of economic performance and productivity, there was a very substantial boost to GDP over a 10-year period. As an academic in the University, I think, of Bradford, who's written extensively on this issue. So we are faced with a democratic challenge, and we're faced with an economic challenge. Now, Nicola has defined the challenges quite well. She's actually looked at 5 challenges and 5 issues by which we need to judge this matter. Now, the first is democratic, the second is economic, the third is social protection. Social protections are very important to us. The rights of employees, not to have, for example, arbitrary cuts in hours for young workers. Those are really important things that we should defend. But she's also defined 2 other areas which are important. One of them is solidarity. It is standing alongside the people of Europe in a whole range of issues. I've spoken a lot about Europe over the last few months as the referendum has gone on. I've spoken in the parliamentary debate immediately after the referendum result. And I talked about the nature of Scotland as a European nation, both as a nation that had been part of a peaceful continent, after 2 world wars that had disfigured the continent and started on the continent. It is the EU, it is a structure that has prevented that taking place, but also our historic role as a European nation, which we are. We are bound into the fabric of Europe. We sent our soldiers to fight there, yes, but we sent our students to study there as well. And we've traded there for generations. So the solidarity argument is very important. And the final one is influence. Europe is the 3rd largest trading bloc on the planet, but it's also one of the key players in influence. And we want to be part of that influencing, and we want to influence it. Now, we argued during the referendum that the best way to do that was to be an individual member of the European Union and a national member of the European Union. And indeed, I still believe that that is the best option. So we are faced with those challenges, and how we respond to those challenges is going to be very important indeed. Nicola asked me some weeks ago to take on the role, essentially, of chief negotiator, to be in the ministerial title, which is rather a long one. It looks like one of those medals that the Soviet generals used to have. It goes all the way across here. Minister of UK negotiation on Scotland's place in Europe. But essentially, I have to start off quite openly by saying the best solution for Scotland is to remain as part of the EU. But the Parliament asked the government, and the government accepted this mandate, to look at all the options. So that's the process we're engaged in. But to understand those options, we need to understand what's happening across Scotland. We need to engage with the UK government, we need to engage with our European neighbours and with others. And that process is underway. I've been to London to meet David Davis. We've had a conversation about this, and we're trying to set up the structure, of course, that would allow us to engage without knowing what they want to do. And that's quite crucial in a sense. I mean, I think what we're seeing very much in London is a fight between the hardest of Brexiteers, and I noticed that Alex Salmond described them today in an interesting phrase. It's actually a phrase that Callum McCaig, the MP, originated, so Alec just took it away, as full English Brexiteers. And those are the ones who just want to get out as quickly as possible, and those who realise that there are some problems in terms of the single market, and particularly in terms of financial services. So we don't fully understand that, but we've got to engage with it, and we've got to engage with our wider European neighbours and talk with them. But we need to engage locally too. And there's the MSP for Argyll and Bute, and it's a huge constituency with lots of different issues. I need to talk to every part of this constituency about the issues that affect them. And the issues affect you as individuals. Because all of you will be involved in matters that impinge upon European activity, even if you don't know you are. I had lunch some weeks ago with the principal of one of the Scottish colleges of further education. We've talked a lot about colleges, about universities, but actually colleges get substantial sums for the employability fund. Colleges get resources from European local authorities, and colleges attract European students. In fact, West College Scotland has over 900 European students. They may not have come specifically to study there, but they are people that, who are now working in other jobs, are engaged in courses there. So what today is about is I want to hear some of your concerns. I want to answer your questions if I possibly can. And I want you to help give some reassurance too, and that's the final thing I will make. Alyn, I'm sure we'll talk about discussions in Europe. I had a surgery on Monday. I won't say where it was, but I had a number of individuals who, I hope regular surgeries, it wasn't remarkable. What was remarkable, and is going to be remarkable, is the number of European citizens who come to those surgeries to talk to me and to say they are worried and concerned. And this particular one, a married couple there, he's Scottish, his wife is from a European nation, and she'd been in tears in the last 4 or 5 weeks because she thought that she might have to go. And he said to me, very bluntly, it was quite touching, he said, listen, I just want you to know I'm absolutely devoted to him, right? And she has made a huge difference in my life. Indeed, he said she'd saved his life, and he couldn't bear the thought that she might have to go and leave. But these are real people, and we've created circumstances have been created in which real people have these fears, and we have to make sure that doesn't happen. So, amongst all the technical detail, amongst all the issues that we discussed, people raising, I took it out to there, people raising technical issues with me, passing through airports and things like that, there are huge issues, that we need to address in our own constituency, and there are huge reassurance we have to give to people, and there's a lot of understanding we have to have about what this is going to be. What will the outcome be? I don't know. And I think that's quite important to understand too. We don't know. We're at the very start of a long process. What we have to do is to get the best possible view for Scotland. And that means the best possible view for every single person in Scotland. And that's what we are trying to engage in. And we're in the vanguard of that. Because the disappointing thing I've seen in the last few weeks in the Scottish Parliament is the other parties that started saying that on the 24th of June, and they were going to stand up for Scotland, aren't doing it anymore. The Tories have walked away from it. The Tories keep telling us that we should be cheerful. And there are lots and lots of opportunities ahead. And lots of places to trade with we haven't thought of. It could be that the inhabitants of the planet circling Alpha Centauri are looking for a good trade deal. I don't know where lots of these other people are. And the only example that the Tories could use this week was to say that there is a 3,000% tariff against whisky in Egypt, which will be moved. It's nothing to do with the European Union. It is to do with the WTO, of which we will have to deal with all 160-something members of the WTO. So, we're at the start of a process. We don't know what that process is going to produce at the end of the day. We're going to, the SNP in government and elsewhere is going to fight very hard for the interests of Scotland, but we need to understand the detail of it. So let's discuss that today, and let's look at some of the issues. And I will be listening, very much in listening mode, and let's take it forward as a party to say that whatever happens, whatever takes place, we are going to, as we always do, stand up for Scotland. Thank you.
Well, I'd add little to that beyond to add my own congratulations to Michael, in that if I was going to choose any of our guys to go toe-to-toe with David Davis, it would be your member here. I'm not jealous, I have to say, but that sounds best of British. There's the old joke about the American tourist who's lost in rural Ireland, and he goes to one of the local farmers, and says, "Hey buddy, how do I get to Tipperary?" And I say, "Ah, but Jesus, if I was going to Tipperary, I wouldn't start out from here." That's how I feel about this whole process. That's how I felt about the referendum. That's how I felt about decades of lack of engagement on the part of the UK with the EU framework. And it's grieved me so much that the EU has been so comprehensively misrepresented over a period of decades. It was John Hume, the great Irish peacemaker, SDLP politician, former MEP, who actually encapsulated it best, that the EU is the best war avoidance mechanism ever invented. It's not fundamentally an economic project. The EU was born out of the ashes of the Second World War, where elite politics broke down. The European continent is more used to bayonets and bombs and bullets than it is to ballots and negotiations. The idea of the EU, the genesis of the EU, and I had the privilege of having a breakfast once with Father Carol Verley, who was one of the real founding fathers of the European project. Project quite deliberately. It was to get the people of Europe to know each other better by living, working, studying, travelling, trading across each other's borders with a minimum of fuss. And it was a project to get the leaders of Europe, the governments of Europe, working closer together in a constant series of negotiations about light bulb standards, fisheries quotas, common agricultural policy, whatever it is. The idea that the ministers of Europe, meeting on a regular basis, develop a familiarity with each other to the point where war becomes that bit less likely. There isn't a village in Scotland doesn't have a monument to when elite politics went wrong on our continent. So the idea that we can somehow say we're not part of this is to deny and forget our own history. And it grieves me that we face the prospect of being taken out of that family of nations against the clear will of the people of Scotland. So whenever I hear talk about the EU referendum could be redone or ignored or rolled back or clarified, I'm pretty uncomfortable with that, because I don't think you can second guess the will of the people. But we have a genuine philosophical conundrum. Scotland voted significantly to remain across every local authority area. 62%, a clear mandate to remain. A narrow majority of the UK voted to leave, an equally clear mandate. But 2 years ago we were told that Scotland's voice mattered. 2 years ago we were told that we were a family of nations, plural. 2 years later we're being told our voice doesn't matter. So we are in actually a very strong political position. So I've never been more proud to be an SNP politician, an SNP member, than on the days after Brexit, the Brexit vote, when our First Minister emerged from Bute House and the first thing she prioritised was the rights of EU nationals in Scotland, New Scots. And I'm getting emails on a daily basis that would break your heart from people within our communities who've made Scotland their home, who are now feeling really nervous and anxious for the future. I'm getting emails from Scots, UK passport holders across the rest of the EU. I'm getting emails from students saying, should I take up that offer? Can I do that course? Can I actually move there, because what will my rights be in a few short years' time? So there's an awful lot of people nervous. You know in your own lives, EU nationals who've made Scotland their home, reach out to them, Just take that away and say, look, we will do what we can. I was at a meeting with Roger Mullen, MP for Kirkcaldy I was in Kirkcaldy actually, strangely enough, which he organised specifically for all the EU nationals on the voters' roll within Kirkcaldy. And it was a great meeting where a number of people came to for the first time actually express how anxious they were. And I have to say that Roger and I didn't have a great many answers for them, but they went away with the absolute commitment that the SNP and the vast majority of Scotland's politicians, I have to say, will be working hard to safeguard the rights of the people who have paid us the supreme compliment of making Scotland their home. And since the Brexit vote, we saw the House of Commons descend into chaos and farce on both sides of the Commons. The Leave campaign was so utterly dishonest. There was 3 interlocking Leave campaigns, and books will be written about how clever the campaigns were. There was Vote Leave, the nominally Conservative organisation. There was Grassroots Out, the nominally UKIP organisation. And then there was Leave.eu, Now here's a question I ask a number of meetings. Can anybody name me any Leave.eu spokesperson? No? Not one. They were the ones that came up with the really gruesome graphics, the really gruesome quotes, that Turkey's going to join the EU. They were set up to be deniable. The 350 million on the side of the bus, Nigel Farage denies the day after it happened. There was 3 interlocking campaigns that could say whatever they liked and then deny it. So we have a problem that people voted for Brexit. We now have no idea what Brexit is. And we find ourselves in the absurd situation that the Tories are themselves trying to argue about what Brexit actually means. And we've got a real problem, and they need to have some solutions. So in terms of where Scotland is, the First Minister's established a standing council on Europe. You can tell it's serious, there's no chairs. It's a very, very serious gathering. It's David Edwards, the former UK judge of the Court of Justice. It's a variety of other people who are real European experts. There's 2 serving politicians part of it. David Martin, the UK's longest serving Labour MEP, who's to his great credit, put the badges to one side and says, I'll work for Scotland. I'm privileged to be part of that as well. And our job is to come up with solutions, or possible solutions. My guys have now come up with round about 28 different parts of the EU's territory that have different status vis-à-vis their member state and vis-à-vis the EU. So I'm not talking about independent membership for Scotland, because independent membership will need to be independent. And that's a bigger discussion for a different topic. If we talk about European status, I think there are examples. You've got the Åland Islands, you've got the Azores, you've got French Polynesia, you've got Guadeloupe. I've got some cracking fact-finding missions built in to go and see how that all works. But there are examples of different parts of the EU's territory that have a different relationship to their member states and to the European Union. Even within the UK, we acknowledge that the Isle of Man has a different status vis-à-vis the EU, as do the Channel Islands, have a different status. Within the UK, there is a plurality of interests in that the situation in Northern Ireland, with a border with the Republic, if there is a Brexit that's meaningful, there will be a hard border. And that's a place where borders really matter. Gibraltar, freedom of movement is existential for Gibraltar in a way that it's actually not for much of the rest of the UK. 25,000 people live in the state of Spain and work in Gibraltar, so if that border stops moving, Gibraltar goes back to being a wee fishing port. So it's existential for Gibraltar to an extent that there are Gibraltarian politicians talking about UDI from the UK altogether in order to preserve the status of that border. You've got the overseas territories as well, the likes of the Turks and Caicos Islands, the British Virgin Islands, have a relationship with the EU acquis communautaire and the single market, but they are not part of it. So we already within the UK acknowledge that variable geometry, to use the term, is possible. So I'm increasingly talking about one state, 2 systems, in that there is going to need to be a special deal for Gibraltar, there is going to need to be a special deal for Northern Ireland. So given that we have a political consensus within Scotland and we have the issue of independence right on the table, damn sure I want to see a special status for Scotland as well. So our starting point is remain means remain. Our starting point is that we celebrate freedom of movement, in and out. We welcome and we value and we celebrate the contribution that EU nationals have made to Scottish life and Scottish society. You can judge us by our deeds. In 2014, in our independence referendum, EU nationals had a right to vote. Now some did, some didn't, some felt they wanted to, some didn't. But they had that right because our definition of Scottish is, do you live in Scotland? Full stop. That was noticed across the European continent. And since 2014, how much has changed? In 2014, there was a number of European capitals didn't quite get the why of independence, which is why there was a chill in terms of the attitudes of the other member states to our cause. That has inverted totally. We have goodwill in spades across the European Union. We have goodwill in spades in Brussels as well. There's a series of turf wars going on within Brussels as to who will lead the negotiations. The European Parliament has appointed Guy Verhofstadt. He's a former Belgian Prime Minister. He is very alive to the reality of Scotland's situation. He met with Nicola in the days after Brexit, and we can do business with him. The European Commission has appointed Michel Barnier, the former French Commissioner. He will be in charge of negotiations. He has form in expressing really strong opinions about the City of London and casino capitalism. So the passporting of financial services will be a big issue for him. And the European Council, which is the member states, have appointed a series of negotiators as well. Donald Tusk, the president in office of the council, will be heading those up himself. But we have goodwill in spades. And where we're talking about status, we have a willingness in Brussels to engage on that basis. They're not going to do anything that's going to encourage us towards independence, yet. But if we go through the gears on this, if we explore every possible status, I think a lot of people at home and abroad will come to the conclusion that we have in this room, that the best way to do this is to be independent. If we want to remain part of the European Union, independence is probably the easiest way to do it. But meantime, let's explore every other option. Let's keep independence on the table, because that means that people take us seriously, but let's go through the gears. I believe that with sufficient political goodwill between Edinburgh and London, and between the member state capitals, there is ways of exploring status that could leave us pretty much the way we are. One scenario being that Scotland, Northern Ireland and Gibraltar remain more or less legally where we are, but it's England and Wales that move to an Isle of Man sort of status. None of this is pretty or elegant, don't get me wrong. All of it will require considerably enhanced devolution, all of it will require some degree of change. But it's not change that we wanted, it's not change that we asked for. So we have been principled and pragmatic throughout this process. We didn't want to see the referendum at all. We lack the delusion of exceptionalism that says the UK needs a special deal within the EU. Our guys at Westminster tried to put in as much progressive elements to the legislation for the referendum as was possible, all of which was rejected. And we now find ourselves with a problem. But it is also an opportunity. And meetings like this are really important to discuss where things are, to share such information as we can. I see my sign-up sheets going round there. I'm sending out an email every Friday with the updates from Brussels about what's going on. There's not many jokes in there, I'll tell you no lies, but it is real information that hopefully will better inform the discussion and the debate, because we're going to need to circle the wagons on this, and we're going to need to work together across all the branches, all the parliaments, all the chambers, like we never have before, because nobody's going to have the monopoly on wisdom on this one. But it is the defining attribute of politics in these islands for the coming years. So happy to discuss. I look forward to your questions and your comments. Thanks very much.
I think we have about half an hour for questions and comments, so please, we'll take them one by one. Let's start here, right, and then we'll work our way down, okay?
Alyn from Alyn. As you move forward to a second independence referendum, you have to recognise that you've got to convince people who voted no last time and leavers, slitherers, that they need to go forward into a European Union which needs fundamental reform. At the same time, you've got to convince the people you're talking with in Europe to accept that you're coming in and advocating reform. What do you think you can do about that?
Well, we're squaring a lot of circles at the moment, so what's one more? We are being listened to in a way in Brussels that in the 12 years I've been in the Parliament, we've not been. The common fisheries policy has been a disaster for fishing communities, it's been a disaster for the fishing industry, it's been a disaster for the fish themselves, the ecosystem's not doing as well. So when we characterise the common fisheries policy as an anti-European policy, because it's the primary reason why Iceland and Norway are not members, the psychological importance of fisheries, we're now being listened to in a way that we weren't. Likewise, where it was almost impossible to be a constructive Eurosceptic because you were just lumped in with Nigel Farage. If you didn't think the EU was goodies and baddies, or goodies or baddies, then you were just in with the awkward squad. And there was an arrogance, and I would say arrogance, from some of the folks in Brussels that, well, you're just the awkward squad, you're just you're bad Europeans. I actually find that offensive. I'm pro-European because it's in the best interests of Scotland, but I also want to see the EU reformed as well. But post the Brexit vote, and I wouldn't overplay the significance of it, 27 is a much bigger number than 1. There's a lot of soul searching going on within the EU and within the member state capitals about, is this working, are the people with us, are they engaged? And where we're coming up with constructive ways of reforming. Right? The biggest change that I would make that would be absolutely fundamental would be for the member state governments to meet in public, in the same way as the Parliament does. It's an intergovernmental organisation, but if it's setting budgets and it's making law, that should be done in public. And that would at a stroke get rid of the idea that a minister can say one thing in Brussels and then say another thing when he or she gets back to the member state capital. So that would bring a transparency to the process, all of which we're now getting listened to with a fresh ear on that. Right? And don't underestimate the extent to which, for an EU that really needs a good news story, Scotland could be it.
Yeah.
But look at where we are on the map, the psychological map for the people of Europe. We're on the periphery. But here's 5.5 million people in a rich, well-known, resource-rich country saying, yeah, hang on, we do want to be part of this. Not at any cost, but we do want to be part of it. So we do have a support that we didn't have before. There also is a debate ongoing about reforming the EU as well.
Yeah.
I want to caution you and others to take this a step at a time, right? I think one of the dangers of this debate that we're having is that we're jumping 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 steps ahead and saying, suppose this negotiation leads to that negotiation, leads to this result. We have to work this out from first principles. Now, use the word principles advisedly. We have to decide what we want, you know, and then we have to measure that against what others are saying and what they might be prepared to deliver. And to slightly misquote Palmerston, countries do not have allies, they have interests. And you know, it's not just our interest then that counts, it's their interest. I'm sure there's a lot of goodwill towards Scotland. But actually, goodwill isn't the same as giving you any help or support or guidance. So I want to do this very, very cautiously. You know, I mean, I'm not known for my caution, you know, in this constituency or elsewhere. I'm sometimes known for the opposite. Julie's laughing at that because she also knows that in other contexts that sometimes I can say things that others find difficult to take. But in this, in particularly our Gallagher Council, I have to say, but in this one, I want to be very cautious, step by step. I think you can look at possible scenarios, as Alyn has been outlining, where there will be certain things and certain places we could go to be a bit like others. But we're not there, we're not anywhere close to that. Where we are is that after 3 months, we don't know what the United Kingdom government wants. We don't know how they want to do it. I mean, there was genuinely a report last week, which most people missed, but is true, that the Chancellor intends to take charge of the negotiations on the financial sector so that he can get free movement of, for bankers. So the only people, you know, one pressure on at the moment is the only people who get movement of travel across Europe are bankers. Now you would think that's just insane, but we're dealing with the Tory party. Yeah, we're dealing with people who are not necessarily rational. And that's, well, actually, that's another thing I just want to stress with people, that people need to think about. There's a great desire to say in this that other people are entirely rational, and they will make decisions based on a rational premise. We have just seen an entire campaign based upon a complete irrationality, which is in some mysterious way will be better off out of Europe, win, led by a group of politicians who knew it wasn't true. So I don't put a lot of store on their supposed rationality. And this debate at the moment is about two sets of people who are saying the other one, when push comes to shove, will be rational. You know, Europe is saying when push comes to shove, the UK government will accept free movement as part of the European single market because they will be rational. Boris Johnson is saying, heard him say on Friday, that Europe will be rational because we drink 300 million bottles of Prosecco a year. I mean, he said it. You know? Now, it's Boris Johnson, he is the Foreign Secretary, yeah? And you know, so his view is, in the end, Europe will be rational because it sells things to us. I don't believe there is rationality like that on either side. So I'm sorry to be a bit of a wet blanket, but I think if we start to build castles in the air about scenarios of success here, we will have a problem. What we need to talk about is what's important to us, both in terms of principles and in terms of what we do. You know, I mentioned the fishing thing earlier on. There are, you know, to the fishing community in Scotland, to many people in the fishing community in Scotland, this is a good thing because it gets rid of a bankrupt policy and starts afresh. However, the reality of their position is the UK government will not behave towards the Scottish fishing industry in any more generous way as done for the last 40 years. And they're the ones who sold it out.
That's right.
So people have to approach this very cautiously, very thoughtfully, and step by step. So that's my newfound caution. which people will find very strange.
I should declare an interest to my wife's German. So
Well, that's a huge issue.
yes,
And
it is.
we should be saying unequivocally that people who are here have the right to stay. But David Mundell said in Inverness last week that that would be conditional upon the same arrangement applying to UK citizens in Europe. Now that's something that requires 27 member states to agree that that might be okay. Now I think it will in the end happen, because I think it's unthinkable it wouldn't, but it's not there.
No.
So.
Thank you.
It looks formidable. We'll start with Fiona and then Angela.
If Article 50 has to be triggered, is triggered, and then we've got 2 years to leave, we're going to presumably go into sort of some economic wilderness as before trade agreements are agreed throughout the rest of the world. And I'm really concerned about what's going to happen to the economy of Scotland in that few year period before, if we don't have anything in place.
Well, I think you're right to be concerned. I wouldn't be anything other than concerned myself. Article 50 has never been triggered. Right? And if you read Article 50, and it's not easy to read, but if you read Article 50, it's reasonably clear. You write the letter, Article 50 is triggered. Whether or not you need a parliamentary vote to trigger Article 50 is a subject of 2 very complicated court cases going on at the moment. And if you needed a parliamentary vote, you might need a legislative consent motion in the Scottish Parliament. But assuming that Article 50 is triggered, yes, you have a process of negotiation, and at the end of that, it can be extended by mutual agreement, but let's assume within the 2-year period you have an agreement. But Article 50 has 3 parts. First part is you leave, right? So that's understood. Trigger it, you go. Doesn't say that you couldn't suspend that at some stage, but you go. Second part of Article 50 is a framework, because what you do in the negotiations is you set the framework for the future relationship. That's really hard to do, but you do it. The third part of Article 50 is you then set your arrangements with everybody else, thereafter on the trading basis. Now, that will require you to be part of the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization operates by unanimity. There are 160, I don't remember how many members of the World Trade Organization, and some of them might find an interest in, not for use these words on radio, playing silly buggers. And saying, well, actually, the Russians might say, we're going to do this. So, of course, it's immensely complicated. The Scottish Government will, to the greatest of its ability, or whatever ability it has, will endeavour to ensure that there is stability in the Scottish economy. The UK government says the same, so they will honour, for example, the single agricultural payment regime until 2020, or the end of the process to 2019-2020. But people trading at the present moment, Nissan car factories in the northeast of England will say to themselves, well, are we going to really be able to sell these cars? Are we going to have to get a proof of origin certificate for every vehicle we send into Europe? Wouldn't it be better that over a period of time we move things? Now, the Tories are saying there is, however, this great world of free trade, which we will be able to enter, and everybody will leap forward and take part in it. I haven't yet seen, with the exception I quoted earlier, the whisky exports to Egypt, which has nothing to do with Europe, I haven't seen any other example. Yeah, this is worrying. And the really additional worry, just to give you another worry, I know you need an extra thing not to sleep at night, is that it's never been done before. Nobody knows how it might be done. And it could be that we just cannot complete the process in 2 years. So it's all going to be concerned. We have to, however, have some confidence that the people of Scotland have the ability to work their way through this, but you wouldn't choose to get involved in this. Angela. Sorry,
I'm going to ask you both questions. So first of all, Mike, now I understand that the UK at the moment wants to prioritise trade but not free movement of people. Do you envisage the UK trying to enter into the equivalent of the Canadian agreement? And is that going to be in the best interest of Scotland? And my second question for Alyn was, you mentioned that we had friends in the EU. Do you envisage that with Brexit there are elements of right-wing, with Trump and elsewhere in the world, that this could be the end of the European programme if the UK is successful in its bid to Brexit? Sorry.
As I say, there's not many jokes in my speeches these days, eh? The impact of Brexit on the 27 has been massively overstated. by ourselves. There's a delusion amongst the UK politicians and the UK media that this is really significant in the continental sense. And actually 27 is a much bigger number than 1. And the way the EU is going to be going has already been telegraphed. The immediate post-vote summit, David Cameron as Prime Minister was there for day 1. He communicated to the Council that the Brexit vote had happened, he was given his tea and then he was sent home. And then day 2 of the summit was the 27th. The Bratislava summit that's just taken place was the 27th. And they're getting on with their lives. And they're getting on with their lives to deal with the refugee crisis, the economic crisis, climate change, implementing the Paris Accords. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. We're not the top of the steam. Now, we're part of a big issue, yes, but the impact of Brexit on the rest of the EU is not going to be existential. There are, you're right, a lot of people bumping their guns, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, the Pajamas movement in Spain, various Italian parties, the Front National in France, who are taking a much more explicitly anti-European tack. Many of them funded by Russian funds, and they are interlinked and they are sharing information and expertise. So we're in dark times, but the idea that the European project is somehow going to fall apart it is not something I recognise from the dealings I'm having. What we do have to be really conscious of is that all of that backdrop, which everybody is aware of, makes it all the more imperative that the UK gets a worse deal than it currently does. Because how can you leave a club and get better terms? If the UK was somehow able to get a better deal than it presently does, then you start to see centripetal forces across the EU, where the Hungarians would want a special deal, the Poles would want a special deal, and then everything starts to unravel. So there is actually, for pragmatic and realpolitik reasons, an incentive in Brussels to avoid the UK getting a better deal than it currently does, which is where we must be, as Michael very, very rightly says, we must be really sober in what we say in this sort of stuff. We must make sure we're not asking for something that is unreasonable or would actually set precedents. We want our democracy to be respected, and I think we can be the good news story that the EU needs, but we need to be really measured in what we ask for and how we say it and how we interact going forward.
Just add 2 things to that before I answer your Canadian, which is an interesting question. The thing we really need to remember is it hasn't happened yet. You know, the media keeps saying, you know, now after Brexit. Brexit hasn't happened. You know, we're nowhere near it happening. You know, this is like the First World War stuff. You know, it'll all be over by Christmas. It hasn't started. So we don't know the answer to any of these things. But just as, you know, Boris Johnson and Liam Fox were talking about trade opportunities, and the setting up of the Department of International Trade indicates very strongly that the customs union will not be part of this, which is a huge problem. It's never talked about. Once you abandon the customs union, you have a big problem in terms of how you free movement of goods. You know, but just as they're talking about opportunities, so is Europe. I read a really interesting piece on Friday from somebody in the banking sector in Germany who's saying, gosh, the opportunities here are fantastic, you know, for everybody, in every aspect, because we're just dropping these people who are worth 15% trade, and we can fill that gap. So there will be a huge opportunity for people to do things who are already within the single market. And that's something that's not being said here, but it's being noticed elsewhere. On Canada, really fascinating. The Canadian agreement was negotiated between Canada and the EU and has some interesting things in it. I don't think it's a model for what is going to happen in this. There is no model. And what Alyn says is absolutely true. If you look at existing models like Norway, the Norwegians will not want to have that replicated with better conditions for the UK. Because then they'll say, hang on a minute, we want that. So they're just not going to do that. And the Swiss model, as Alyn also knows, is hated by both sides, because it's static, it's not dynamic. So you know, it's all individual treaties. So no existing model will work, and it's not clear what a new model will be. But the really interesting thing about the Canadian example is not to do with Europe, but to do with Canada. Because there is a federal system in Canada, and because the individual provinces have certain rights on trade, they had to be involved in the negotiation. So when the negotiation took place for the Canadian Trade Agreement, it was necessary for the provinces to be in the room. Right? Now, they had established a system, and I had a long conversation with the Agence Générale of Quebec on Thursday about this, because they were part of it. What happened was they had a pre-meeting with all the provinces that came to an agreement. And that was the position on which Canada negotiated. Now the reason they did that, not the Canadians were particularly happy to do it, but because the Europeans insisted upon it. Because they said, hang on a minute, we're not going to have a trade deal with you about something which you can't deliver. So if we have a bit of that trade that involves Quebec, you can't sign for them because you can't guarantee that will happen. So it had to be that type of model. That is important at this very early stages when we are looking about the model for discussion. You know, we don't have a federal system, and Europe's not going to get involved in telling parts of a member state what, a member state how to deal with its parts, but there is an issue in there. You know, if you have devolved competences, as we have, which are entirely devolved, 85% of UK fishing is a Scottish responsibility. Agriculture is entirely devolved. In higher education, you'll hear me well, I was Minister for 5 years for it. Higher education are only two things that are not actually part of the devolved settlement. One is quality assurance, which is actually on a European level now, so it could be devolved back to us. The other one is research funding, and about 30% of that is European. So, you know, we've got areas of devolved competence, which I think it would be inconceivable that the UK government would negotiate for us in that regard. Now, you know, that's, the UK is sovereign, so you can say, well, no, that's dealt with within the devolved settlement, but that is going to be a big area for discussion. I mean, I think we have to be very clear about that, because you can't trade away, you know, have traded away things that you're responsible for. The quid pro quo in that is if powers are returned to the United Kingdom as a result of this, then some of those powers have to come back to Scotland, and not just in devolved areas. Migration is a shared responsibility in Canada between certain of the provinces and the federal government. So you could say that migration might become a responsibility of Scottish Parliament. The trouble with this stuff, as you see, is it's immensely complex, and so much is being written at the moment about it too. It was once observed it was more written about St Kilda than any other small plot of ground. You know, so many words. It's not going to be anything compared to Brexit, because there's a whole industry already. And one of the things I'm involved in at the moment is trying to find a way in which we can get that material into people's hands. We need Scottish Government needs to be helping people to see the huge range of stuff, some of which, of course, you will see from Europe, is telling us things that, with respect to our media will not tell us, because the perspective they have is of what's happening from this side. And we'd like to say that in many European countries they're just saying, well, French, for example, to you is, by and large, we will be able to return to a purer and better Europe. Yeah, because these people are bucking it up. Sorry, yes. Behind you there was a question, very patient question. No, actually it was your husband, but you could do it if you want. You had your hand up. But on you go, Marie, and then we'll take it.
I wondered, as I said before, I come from an area where fishing is an important industry, and we sell most of our fish to France and Spain and Italy in shellfish. There is a lot of awareness of the situation in Spain and how they might view our situation in Scotland. There's also a sense of the situation in Gibraltar being an influence, and I just wondered if you guys would mind expanding a little bit on some of that, on what Spain might, how Spain might view Scotland coming in as an independent nation.
It will depend who is in government in Spain. And at the present moment, as you know, they have gone through 2 elections without electing a government. You know, the present government would be hardline and unsympathetic. A different government might take a different point of view. The Spanish will always be nervous, but I think we're so far away, Marie, from that being the issue. We should be aware that there will be different views in different countries, how it is operated. You know, although an accession would require unanimity, the process of withdrawal does not require unanimity because it's negotiated by the Council. I think that's pretty clear now that the Council would negotiate it. So it is one of these unknowables. Gibraltar is the big issue for Spain, more than we are. I mean, you know, we exaggerate our own importance. They wouldn't want to see us doing things, but Gibraltar is vital for them. It's a huge matter of sovereignty for them, and it's a matter of the existence of Gibraltar as well. And you know, the First Minister's met with Gibraltar. I'm intending to do so. I think we'll all have conversations. We need to understand where that's going. I think we must be very careful, generally, about making assumptions about what other nations are thinking. These will be driven by self-interest. They'll be driven by their own requirements, and you know, we will be tangential to that. And we just have to recognise, you know, that that's where we are. Who knows where it will go? I keep saying who knows, and people keep saying, what? So the answer is who knows. Sorry, there, and then Jerry.
mentioned that you'd identified a number of areas, islands, other regions of member states which have a different relation to the European Union than their mother member state. Is that mainly a loose arrangement or a more intensive relationship with the European Union?
They're all unique. Much of them are down to the existing constitutional arrangements within the member state when the member state acceded, whenever that might have been. They're also evolving. I mean, the Faroe Islands is going through a very lively discussion about greater enhanced autonomy. Likewise, French Polynesia has just updated how EU law applies to it. They're all unique in their own way. You're right, by and large they are a looser semi-detached arrangement to the whole, but that's because they're a looser semi-detached arrangement to their own member state. Often it's about the specifics of the geography as well, which is where, as I say, we'll be taking, I'm increasingly talking about quantum constitutional theory. We're taking it to places where it's never been before. It will be a unique situation for our unique circumstance. But we do have the political strength that we have a cross-party consensus within Scotland, we have a unanimity across the Scottish vote, and we have the plurality of interests within the UK that will need to be respected, or else we could see all sorts of consequences for Gibraltar, for Northern Ireland, and indeed for us. So the UK, and Michael's much closer to this than I am, but I do get the sense that the UK is taking that seriously, and they're certainly at the moment trying to find something that's going to be remotely workable to the extent that they know what they want themselves. But my point being that within the Brussels setup, seen from Brussels, constitutional exceptionalism is not a new thing. So there are precedents that we can point to. None of them will directly fit and none of it will be pretty. But there are examples, and there are. The Hague Convention, for example, was acceded to by the UK but only applied in Scotland because our law was so devolved and so independent that the Hague Convention only worked for Scots law, for private international law. It didn't apply to English law. So there are precedents that we can point to, and certainly from the expert group at the moment, we're trying to find as many things that we can pull off the shelf when we need to, because that's all we know. In the absence of much clarity coming out of Westminster, we're just getting all our ducks in a row, ready for when it does start.
It also applies to the different constitutional nature of those places themselves. For example, in Belgium, the devolved settlement allows the two devolved provinces to have external treaties on internal competences. So if you have an internal competence, you are allowed to have an external treaty on it. We don't have that. But actually that would apply rather nicely to us, so we could then corral the areas in which we have internal competence and say we can negotiate upon those ourselves directly. Other places, the issue of free movement is not an issue. Liechtenstein has an arrangement which specifically excludes free movement, but that's because it is a country of 37,000 people. And if everybody turned up to Liechtenstein, you wouldn't be able to lie down at night to sleep. So it doesn't exist. Whereas Switzerland has an arrangement which includes free movement, but they've tried to reject it in the referendum, and they are in some difficulty. They won't be allowed to reject it. They're trying to come to a compromise based on acceptance of job offers, I think, is a compromise, but I don't think it will happen in that way. So it's I heard somebody describe it the other day as a three-dimensional chess played inside a Rubik's Cube. And there is that complication which you have to understand. Jerry, you might be the last questioner depending how long you go on. I look forward to it.
I wouldn't demand more than a third of the time that you take to answer.
True. Well, in that case, I should be here till at least midnight. Okay.
You, in the middle of, or rather, during a whole complicated discussion on the difficulties of Brexit, which, funnily enough, didn't arise during the 2014 referendum campaign, although there were some difficulties there. You raised the glorious word of sovereignty, which, as you well know, is my bête noire, not bête noire, my sole aim. do you think that it is possible that if we were to achieve and to go for an independence referendum after the UK had exited from the EU, that the campaign might well reduce not to for or against Scottish independence, but for the UK Union or for the European Union, since the Scottish people will have shown that they prefer the European Union to independence, which certainly is not possible within the European Union in terms of the regain of sovereignty of the Scottish people.
Do not attempt to write on both sides of the paper at once, sort of question. Jerry, I don't know. I mean, a genuine answer, I don't know. I think that the issue of whether you choose the European Union or the British Union is one I think that we should be very careful of formulating it in that way, because I don't think that is a formulation that would either be positive or helpful to anybody. You know, you could conceive of circumstances in which, by dint of economic arrangements, you maintained strong connections with both those unions, right? Without necessarily being a member of either, I suppose. That is, you know, logically one of the things that you could go for.
And still be independent.
And be independent, but be, you know, involved in both those unions in some way or another. For example, you know, you could find a type of economic arrangement with Europe, and you could have a customs union in the UK, or vice versa, right? So I think it is somewhere down this very long, complicated track that has lots of turnings and lots of forks and pitfalls and things to fall into. You get my point. There is that issue lurks, but I hope that we are able to steer ourselves in a way that we're asking people to vote for a positive engagement rather than choosing between two possibly negative engagements.
Be prepared to abandon the idea of independence, which is the primary and sole aim of this party.
And Jerry, I know you and I have differed on many things over the years, but the thing that has united us, although I have never thought of being united with you, but the thing that has united us is our belief in independence. And I still have it, and so do you.
Yeah.
One more question.
One last sentence.
One last sentence. How long is the sentence?
But I do believe that you cannot have independence and be a member either of the UK Union or the European Union. And you seem to believe that you can be independent within the confines and constraints and the lack of sovereignty of the European Union.
Thank you for that sentence. I do believe in independence, and I believe in being the membership of the EU. Draw from there what you will. One last question, please. No? Aha, yes, please, Paul.
My take on the issue of Brexit is that the Scottish Government are coming into the Brexit issue from one direction, and the UK Government are coming in from another direction. And the Scottish Government, basically its aspiration is to remain in Europe. No change, status quo. Because the Scottish electorate have said, that's what we want to be up there. The UK population have said, we want out of Europe. So they start from two different directions, and the Scottish Government is coming down from the top, where it wants to be, and having to reduce to a certain level at which it may feel this is the best deal we can get for Scotland. But England, or the UK government, is starting from the opposite direction, and it's saying at the moment, if we go out of Brexit, we get nothing, and we're trying to climb up the ladder to get as much as we can. And both sides will occupy different rungs on the ladder. How do you close that gap in your discussions with British UK ministers?
Get another ladder.
I
don't give us answers.
I don't think I agree with your analysis entirely. I think that there are different motivations on both sides and different perspectives on both sides. I do not know how the negotiating process will go, inevitably. You don't know that at the start of the negotiating process. You have good intentions. I stress here, as I've stressed in the Parliament, I have the best of intentions, as the Scottish Government has, to have serious, meaningful discussion. But I don't know what that will lead to. I honestly have no idea. But I'm not evading it. I've honestly no idea. We haven't even started. We've had one half-hour meeting. We've got a lot of work to do. I don't know how long that will take. I don't know what the schedule will be. So I don't know. But it is the intention that's important at this stage. And the intention is to get that best deal for Scotland. You are right to say that that best deal was membership, which we were in. I still believe it would be, but I can't say what will be the final outcome of this or what the process of negotiation.
But that needs a meeting of minds between the Scottish Government and the UK Government.
The process of, I'm being very serious about this, Bob, I'm not being flippant at all. The process of negotiation always attempts to make people agree at the end of the day after a long debate. This is going to be a long process of discussion. I think I might miss the odd constituency meeting because I'm doing elsewhere. I know that I will be censured by you, Bob, for so doing. I can see the motion, and Jerry will second it, but there we are. One of the rare occasions I would like Jerry to move a remit back, but he wouldn't do it. But it's going to take some time, and we are going to have to be prepared for that. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming. Have a great day. Thank you, IndependenceLive.net.
Thank you.
Really well done. Anthony.